Alrighty, everybody. Let's see what kind of games we can get in today. So I'm playing on Lee Chess. I like these 10 plus O games. They're fast enough that I can always get at least a game in. This would normally be my commute time back and forth to work, but since I'm working from home, I've been taking my commute time and trying to learn some chess while I'm, better myself while I can. Learn a new skill, learn a new talent. In this case, I'm learning a new hobby. So we're in kind of a Queen's Gambit declined. I'm expecting this pawn push to come. I'm going to go ahead and do my 3-pawn setup so that I can have my bishop ready to go. I'm assuming what the next two moves are going to be one of these two, or possibly c6 as well. Those are the 3 candidate moves. All right. My opponent's just going to go ahead and develop naturally. Now I could offer a bishop trade. Notice mine's defended, his isn't, so you'd have to either move it or capture. So I'm going to hold off on that. I'm just going to go ahead and develop my knight. I'll get my other knight up here in a second. Yep, so this is a pretty typical Queen's Gambit line. Having the light square bishop out is a little unique in the fact that it is bringing this guy out a little early, but that's okay. So now we gotta look at knight forks. The knight could come there, that's fine. This is setting up for a possibility of a double attack on that knight, so I'm probably gonna push a3, just to make sure there's no double attack on this particular knight. Making sure there's no forks. There is kind of a fork here, but it would take my opponent a couple of moves to get his bishop. I guess the queen could. If the queen comes here, then I'll have to rotate my queen up. So let's start with this move. Let's start with the a3 pawn, just to stop this, so that we don't have a double attack on this particular knight. If the queen comes down, I guess my opponent is stopping me to rotate my knight up. That's fine. So now my bishop comes to d3, which I've said on a few occasions that when I play the Queen's Gambit, I've tried my bishop on a couple of these spots, and I find that more often than not always, more often than not, I say to myself, I wish it had been sitting here. So I'm going to keep plopping it here until I'm told otherwise, basically. The idea is that in the Queen's Gambit, I hate to move this bishop until the last possible second because black can capture this pawn at any time, and my goal is to recapture with this bishop. Well, if I move it and then move it a second time, I'm losing tempo. Whereas if I hold off, and then my opponent captures and then I grab, that's just a single move. I'm not losing that tempo. I'm ready to castle. My opponent has another move to make to get ready to castle. This bishop can't go here, can't go here. Looks like it's going to go one of these 2 squares. Yep. So now my opponent is ready to castle as well. So there's 2 defenders in this knight, and I have 2 attackers. I'm going to go ahead and put a 3rd attacker on that knight. So we could exchange. Essentially what I'm saying is I'm going to trade my bishop and my knight for this bishop and knight and this pawn. So I've got 3 attackers, only 2 defenders. And I don't know, well, I guess, nope, I don't think my opponent can get another defender on this knight. So looks like I could win a pawn when it's all said and done. The question is, do we castle first or do we go for it? I do give up control of this pawn, so, okay. So let's try this first, because we're going to lose control of this pawn, and so I don't want to lose that pawn completely. So we're going to open up the whole center of the board. My king is still in the center, but I only have 1 move to make to castle. I'm assuming my opponent's going to capture back, but the idea is this bishop is the defender of that pawn. I'm about to move the bishop, therefore I'm about to undefend that pawn. And I'm spending all this, I'm spending all this brain power. Whatever brain power is up here. I'm spending this time, okay. to consider my options. And in this case, I'm going to capture back with the pawn to solidify this structure a little bit. So I'm still up my pawn, but my opponent's plan has seemed to work. They have evened out by doing that move order, they have evened things out. Okay, so they took the initiative and they made that happen. All right, good for them. Now what? I don't have a light square bishop anymore though, damn it. So this alignment is not going to help me. I would love to get this guy here, but this pawn is doing a good job of holding down the fort. All right, let's just go ahead and castle. That's the smart decision. I was debating on doing the same thing that I preach about. So I prefer to hold off on castling until I'm sure my opponent is also castling, because before you castle, like if I step back, before you castle, this rook is aiming down on this particular square. My queen is aiming down on that square. So if I could have gotten this particular pawn, let's say 1, 2, 3, traded off, and opened up this outside file, it could have been interesting. So maybe I should have done that. I don't know. This particular pawn has become a bit of a troublesome now. I wonder if I could find a way to get rid of that. That's not good enough. Well, here to here does mean that that becomes a threat. So we'll keep that in the back of our mind. If I can rotate my queen over to here somewhere, right? If I get my queen on g3, the knight could go to h4, then to f5. The knight on f5 could be interesting. Then I've got some threats. This bishop has got to get developed. I got to get my rooks connected. So that's one of our opening principles, is to continue to develop and then make sure your rooks get connected. They are not connected. There's a bishop in the way. So where do we put the bishop? You know, actually, I would really like to get it along this long diagonal, but this pawn is really being a butthole. All right, so let's get the bishop here. We can move our rook to b1 and take control of this open b file. Because there is a free pawn sitting here. I wonder if I should push this a pawn a little bit more to get my bishop up this way. Nah, because that trades off one of my good pieces. My dark square bishop is still a good piece. Even though that my opponent has this pawn structure, my dark square bishop is still a good piece. The knight is a little awkward right now, because the squares that my knight could go to. So this might be one of the cases where bringing the knight over to the wing might be a good idea. My opponent only has a dark square bishop as well, so I'm thinking I might even push my center, my g-pawn. That would encourage this or support this knight to the wing, because it would be a defended knight. And then I could rotate up. My pawns on dark squares would do a good job of blockading my opponent's dark square bishop. All right, let's look around the rest of the board to see if there's anything that could be happening. So if I were my opponent, I'd be looking at developing. So that's what I would be looking at. I'd go ahead, probably get this knight up. Maybe get my rook over on e8, right, to put pressure on this semi-open file. I don't know what happened to my opponent. They're taking a really long think here. a really long think. Yep, so just a standard developing move by my opponent. Let's go ahead and get our bishop up like we talked about. We're going to go ahead and rotate my rook under. The bishop feels a little ugly, right? But a couple of pawn pushes. So if I push this pawn, this pawn is in jeopardy. So either it's going to have to capture, which then allows me to push my other pawn. Granted, I would recapture with the... actually, that would come with check, too. My opponent would have to slide the king over. Okay. Into a dark square corner. All right. So that would open up this diagonal at least to here. My opponent's pawns are in the way. But at least get this diagonal opened up for my pawns out of the way. So that might be my next move, is to push this pawn. Get my rook under. All right. So let's start with the rook under, because now that my opponent is guarding this particular square twice. Yeah, okay. So now we're looking at a knight fork, but I've got it covered here, so I'm okay. Now we can push this pawn. And that'll give us an attack on this knight. Actually, an attack here and an attack here. So I can just take, I think, right? Right, I can just take. Is there anything that I have to worry about? Any kind of issues? No, I think I'm good. So we won a piece. My opponent, I'm guessing they were distracted slightly, so this comes with check. The only move is either to put the rook up, which would be fine, or slide the king, which makes more sense. Now we're going to... Now what are we going to do? I would like to push this pawn. So I'm offering my opponent a pawn, but I'm going to take back. I cannot take back with the queen. There is a tactic here I want you guys to be aware of. So let's say I take with the queen. My queen is undefended. My opponent's queen is here. This rook, this bishop comes down with check. It's a sacrifice, but it is with check. I have to handle that, so it doesn't matter in this case if I take, or if I move, then queen takes queen. So let us go ahead and take this as an opportunity to get our queen centralized, get our queen on this same diagonal, and now we got to figure out how we can get rid of this bishop, this pawn. I think if we stick the knight there, that is a good sacrifice. So the knight coming to here, my opponent cannot capture, because that would open up checkmate. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm inviting a sacrifice, but if my opponent takes it, that's checkmate. If they don't take it, I've got a fork. So I'm going to win some material, I believe. Ooh, clever, clever, clever. Very nice. So the question is, do I want to get a queen for a queen? Do I want to do a queen trade yet? I'm up material. Is a queen trade worth it right now? So let's do this. We've got time. So knight here. Captures, then capture, my knight is free to run. Let me think this through. Or do I just move the queen? But then I'm gonna exchange this off. Let's try this, right? This is a little bit aggressive. Let's try this. So I'm inviting a queen trade. My knight would be recaptured. I could be losing a knight here in the process. which would equalize the material. But I'm so far up on the clock right now that and then he's going to recapture back. So I'm up on the clock. I've equalized the material. Let's go ahead and double up. I'm going to be going after this pawn here in a second. Ooh, I have to be careful. I have back rank issues. So I have a back rank issue. So does my opponent. And I wish there was a way that I could trick him into going after something. But I have solved my back rank issues. My opponent also needs to solve their back rank issues. I'm going to go ahead and advance this pawn. Notice I can pick up a pawn here. Yep. Put your rook behind a passed pawn. So we've gonna, unless my opponent pushes down here. Start with check. My opponent's gonna push up. Excellent. And now I do have this situation here. My opponent just has too little time on their clock, sadly. Using my king to defend the base of the pawn chain. Notice I do have an issue here that I can't... Yeah, my opponent timed out. But I feel like I was in a pretty good position at this point in time. I have a nice, solid connected pawn chain. I'm about to pick up this pawn here. This pawn is going to be probably a challenge to get it all the way up. But my opponent's king is far enough away that I should be able to lock him out of the game. And then there is... so this is what I was going to try. Let's say I was going to try pushing. And then let's say capture, capture, capture. This becomes an isolated pawn. Not what I want. Okay, so not great, but this pawn could be a tricky pawn to handle. But again, I could just slide my rook over at the end of the day. So pick up and then slide. Oops, pick up and then slide. So I feel like I am in slightly better shape. So I'm going to give myself a 1 to 2 point advantage here. Very small. But that's it. Just a very small advantage, assuming no clock. So let's take a look at what the evaluation says. Less than what I would imagine. So playing perfect moves. Yeah, this is a good move. It's pinned. I see. And I can't give up. Very interesting. Okay, so that is interesting. I did not consider that at all. So this is what I considered. So now it's a very even game at this point in time. All right, so it is a bit of a drawish game. Endings where each opponent has a rook is a bit of a challenge. Oops, don't force variation. Promote to main, and then delete, delete, and delete, and delete. Okay, so right here is where the game ended. Yeah, see, I was considering, let's see, it's white's move. I was considering something like this. Yeah, but unfortunately it undefends both of my back. Yeah, and if I were black, this is a better move. Yeah, this becomes harder and harder to hold, doesn't it? Ah, and that. Okay, so that becomes really hard to hold. All right, so maybe it's not as clean cut as I thought. These end games are a challenge. So I have been, okay, I have been studying some end games. I picked up an app that lets you practice end games. It doesn't teach you the end games, it just gives you some scenarios to practice. And so I've been trying to work through them myself. I'm still trying to find a good end game material training process that I can use in conjunction with the app. So I use the app to practice the scenarios, but I can have something that teaches me the mindset of those scenarios on how that, let's say, for example, let's say you have an end game that's 2 bishops, right? I have 2 bishops, you have 0 bishops. How do you checkmate? Well, you've got to get this crossing pattern, right? So this was a good game to my opponent. Let's get out of here real quick. Tools. Let's delete the board. How do you... no, let's go to board editor. Let's clear the board. Let's say that we each have a king, but I have 2 bishops. How do you checkmate from here? Well, it's totally possible. What you end up doing is you want to get into a situation, and I don't know exactly how to do it, but you want to get in a situation where the opponent's king is in this kind of pattern, and you can slice across both of them. So you got to chase him to the corner somehow. So that's check. He can only go here. No, that allows him to escape down the board this way. Yeah, so there is a way to do it, but it's a bit of a challenge because you've only got this and this, and you really need to get... Let's back up even more. So from here, like this. So I'm slicing across that. I'm slicing across that. I guess you just kind of keep closing them down. So now these are all cut off. These are all cut off. So that's cut off. These are cut off. This is cut off. This is cut off. So the king, these are cut off still by the king. That's cut off. That's cut off. That's cut off. So the king has to go there. And then, yeah, look at this. I don't know. That's the thing is I don't know. Because a normal person would go, oh, there you go. But that's not covered, so the king can escape. You see what I'm saying? It's a bit of a challenge. It's possible, right? Like, man, okay, so there. It's possible to do it, but I don't know the pattern, and so I want to learn the methodology behind these kind of things. I can practice. I now have a tool that I can practice, but I don't have a tool yet that will teach. So we're getting close. We're getting close, right? One step at a time. I'm learning some things. In the meantime, I have learned a little bit about another opening. I'm not going to do a lot of studying on it, but I have been just kind of playing it. It's all right, so it's the Petrov. I know the Petrov. I've played against it a little bit, but I haven't really studied it, and we haven't studied it in depth here. But I promised I wouldn't study a new opening until I started studying endgames, and now I'm finally studying endgames, and so I feel like I'm starting to make some progress. I think where my rating is right now, if we look at my rating again, profile, rapid games. If you look at my rating, right, so we're kind of hovering just around this 1400 line, and I'm okay with that, right? This is a very solid position to be in. I'm getting better at chess. To make it to the next level, though, I think I've got to start learning how to close out games. My openings are getting better. My middle games are all right. So I still drop pieces. I still make mistakes, but they're getting better. I'm seeing things tactically, like in this game, right? In the game that we just finished playing, we saw a tactic and we didn't fall to it. So let's go back to analyze. Let's go back to where the queens were on the board. Right? So right here, we did not fall into this tactic and we saw it, right? Boom. Boom. So we saw the tactic where we could drop a queen and we didn't fall into it. And that's because we've been studying tactics. We've been studying positions and practicing looking at the board correctly. So we're getting better in that case. So our openings are good, our mid games are mediocre, our end games are shit, but we're starting now to practice. And if we can start to put all three pieces together, things could start happening. And even though my memory is not good, I'm never going to be able to memorize deep lines, right? I'm never going to be able to do things like some of the grandmasters can do, right? Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, like these guys who just played the most recent tournament, they have so many games memory. They can tell you exactly who they played, when they played, what the outcome was, what the exact move order was. They can say, oh yeah, when I played against Nakamura, when Carlsen played against Nakamura in game 1, we did this move set, and I decided to go with this move instead of this move. Because I can't remember the game I played just now. Like, I can barely remember how this game started. In fact, Queen's Gambit. So I can barely remember, like, just one game at a time. I could not tell you at all what the previous game I played was. My memory is I just don't have that kind of memory that some people do. So I have to practice my tactics so that at the time I can work it out over the board. That's my thought process. Anyway, so my openings are getting better, my mid games are getting better. Now it's time to crank out some of the end games, and we have one half of our training tool. When I get the other half of a training tool, some kind of training thing, I can put them together, and then we'll start practicing end games together. Whew, a lot of rambling, guys. But this was a fun game. This was a good game. We had some good. We made some good decisions in it. I feel really good about it. We probably made some bad decisions at some point in time or another, but I'm just clicking through to watch the evaluation over here to kind of see what it looks like. But it looks like we had pretty good evaluation throughout most of the game. My opponent was ranked almost identical to me. They took a lot of time for some reason on one or two of these moves, and their clock dwindled. In fact, there's a way to... no. There's a way to see how long the moves took, but we can just look at the clock. My opponent took a long time around here. So we're about even in clock still, and then yeah, right here my opponent took 4 minutes. 4 minutes for a standard development move. So I believe that possibly they were distracted in real life. Something took them away from the game, and caused them to lose that much time. But then all of a sudden, at the end of the game, instead of it being an even exchange, it was a time scramble for my opponent. And when I have 5 minutes and my opponent only has 1 minute, I feel like I'm going to be in a much better shape there. So, all right, guys. I hope something good happens for you today. I hope you get a chance to play some chess, and if something cool happens in your games, don't forget to let me know. Yeah, maybe we'll get a game together soon. All right, talk to you later. Bye.